Okay, good evening everybody. A warm welcome to those attending and also to our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. This is a meeting of the Residents' Education and Environmental Services Policy Overview Committee. My name is Councillor Wayne Bridges and I am the chairman of this meeting. A key role of this committee is to monitor the performance of local public services within its remit and to hold in-depth reviews on topics of resident interest. We engage with a range of external witnesses in our activity, which can include community groups, residents and subject matter experts. Where we identify areas for change or improvement, we make recommendations to the decision-making cabinet. Details of the business to be considered today is shown on the agenda, copies of which are available in the room and also accessible on the YouTube underneath the broadcast. For those present in the room and intending to speak, please note that you will be filmed and any statements you make will be recorded and made public. For those in the public gallery, you will not be on camera. And a reminder to councillors, officers and those speaking today that you should turn the microphone button on when speaking. This will ensure that you can be heard in the room and by those watching online. And going around the table this evening, I will introduce the people present. To my right is the Vice Chairman, Councillor Markham, Councillor Alan Kaufman, Councillor John Morgan, Councillor Paula Rodriguez and Councillor Debbie Radia. To my left we have the Democratic Services Officer Neil Fraser, the Labour Lead Councillor Jan Sweeting, Councillor Mavers, Mr Tony Little and also officers with their presentations here this evening. A few house rules, please place your mobile phones on silent or switch them off. If we have members of the public here today, there are residents' feedback forms available, and if the fire alarm does sound this evening, please follow the officers to the nearest exits. With that said, we move on to apologies for absence, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, apologies received from Councillor Tockwell.
Thank you very much. Is there any declaration of interest in matters come before this meeting? No, I can confirm that all business this evening will be discussed in part 1, which brings us on to item 4 to agree the minutes of the previous meeting. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. On page 7, it says resolved that the officer's feedback on the provision of uniform groups in Northwood Hills. I use that as an example of some of the uniform groups that were not mentioned in the report. It's not just Northwood Hills. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sweeting.
Thank you, Chair. There's a couple of points, actually. The top of page 4, when it says about resolved issues, we did consider the update on high needs funding that would be provided when available. So I think that was all agreed at the meeting, that would be another item to be resolved. And also, we have yet to have the discussion about the additions to the major review, which is on page 9. There was going to be a further meeting, is there not, between the chairman
yes.
on that. There's one issue that does concern me, and that is the veracity of the minute. I know the minutes are correct, but what was said in the minutes on page 7 concerning the 2.5 million for youth services. Now, it's my understanding that it's not going to be used for any of the items that were listed there. I believe that the 2.5 million is spread out over a number of financial years, and so I would be grateful for clarity on that. And I don't know whether it would be through this committee or I would need to do it as part of a members' inquiry, because I do think we need to have clarity on that.
Okay. Yeah, the committee will be fine, Councillor Sweeting. And regards to the major review, I'll happy to discuss that after the meeting with you if you're happy for that discussion to take place. Councillor Mavers.
Thank you, Chair. Just a small one, and then another note. On page 6, it's 32,000 attendances as an extra 0.
Sneaking a few more in.
Yeah, which I mean, that would be great to get the VSO up to that place. And equally, just to note, I'm still creating questions for officers regarding youth services. The budget kind of took a lot of my attention.
Mr. Little.
Just a matter of accuracy, I did attend the meeting.
Thank you. Is that agreed? Thank you. Item 5 is our draft school improvement strategy 2020 to 2023, pages 11 to 38. Welcome to Iris and Rainey. You'll be giving tonight's presentation, so whenever you're ready to do so. Could you place your microphone on, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The draft strategy is an updated version. So it previously came to POC and Cabinet in 2015, and in that time the statutory guidance for schools causing concern was updated by central government in September 2019. So we took the opportunity to update this strategy to make it in line with central government guidance and to work with our partners, our local education area partnership, which is built with our teaching schools and head teachers, and develop this strategy to be a joint working strategy for the local authority with our partnership group, our external stakeholders, our schools. What we would like this committee to do is, if they have any questions with this draft strategy, to be able to discuss these at this meeting so we can take it forward and consider it before finalising the strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll invite questions from members. I believe Councillor Markham wishes to ask a question.
Yes. I mean, I read this very carefully, and I understand it's just an update of what has gone before. And it talks about stakeholders. To me, there is a glaring absence, and that's parents. I can find no reference in here to involving parents in determining the way forward and how things are going. And equally, I see nothing in here about creating opportunities for whistleblowers. So why aren't parents considered to be a key stakeholder, and what provision are you going to be making for whistleblowers?
I think in terms of working partnerships with our schools, then we rely on our schools as working with parents and dealing with those issues there, and the same with whistleblowing. So through our working relationship with schools, that's how we would address those issues.
Do you wish to follow up, Councillor Markham?
Well, if I may, but on a slightly different thing. One of the things which has long concerned this committee when we talk about education are those children with special needs. And I'd be interested to know, we have some 51,000 children that we're responsible for in the widest sense. I know about academies and all that. But I'd like to know how many children are classified as special needs. That's my first question. And as part of that is, how much are we talking about? How much money are we talking about? How much does it cost on average to educate, I hesitate to use the words, but an ordinary child? And how much does it cost to educate a special needs child? And what criteria do we have for assessing the value of that money spent?
Thank you. So special education needs is dealt with under Tony Zaman, our social care. We work very closely with them. I can bring back the numbers and share them with Neil Fraser in terms of how many special needs children we have in the borough, for your first question. The second, in terms of the cost, there is a huge difference between the cost of teaching a child without special needs versus a child with special needs. And our special needs team under Vikram Hansari looks at, and they look at the needs of each child, and it goes through a process, and if that child is deemed to need additional support, they may need one-to-one support. It depends on the need of that the special education needs for that particular child. They go through a thorough and robust assessment by that team, and then funding is allocated accordingly. But the cost is very, very different. So in a classroom where you have 30 children being taught, if you have one special education needs, it may require an additional learning support teacher attached to it.
I'd still like to have those figures, so perhaps outside of this meeting. Wayne,
happy to put that as an action point for the clerk to note and distribute to the committee. Mr. Little?
Thank you, Chairman. I've got two questions. One is, you talk in here about the School Strategic Partnership Board. Is that a new board? Is it an existing one? And does it do anything else, or is it only for the purpose here? That's the first question. The second question is, obviously, where schools need support, you need resources and people and so on. Do we have the finances for the resources necessary for this plan?
Thank you. So for the first question, with our School Strategic Partnership Board, that has been in place since 2015 and drew up this original strategy. And previous to that, it evolved from there. So it's been a long-standing board that we have. It's our highest level education board that we have in the council with our head teachers. We have another newly formed board, which is the LEAP, Local Education Area Partnership. That is built with our teaching schools, and they will be the main drivers and the deliverers of this strategy. They will be the operational side of this strategy, and our local authority officers will be monitoring on a strategic level. And that is fairly new. We've been building the LEAP for about 1 year now, and it's in a place where it's able to, once this strategy is final, able to start working with schools in need and schools causing concern to help them rapidly improve. Your third question about finances to deliver this, it will be, the plan is to deliver it within current resources, and this is why we've tweaked this strategy slightly to be more partnership orientated, so we can draw on the support from our teaching schools. They receive funding centrally by central government.
Mr. Little, would you like? Okay. Councillor Sweeting.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can I first of all say thank you to the officers. It's a very, very detailed report. Nothing more than I would expect from the Education Department that I used to be a member of many, many moons ago. But really what I would like to know is how effective has been the previous strategy. We have concerns, I know, in this committee that results have not always matched the hard work that our teachers and the staff at the centre are actually putting into improving matters. So how have we done, excuse me, with the strategy that came from 2015 to 2018? And will it be possible to have that information? I know that we've got more schools that are good and outstanding than ever before, but that's only one indicator. The other indicator, of course, is how our kids are doing at key stages, and I think it would be really useful, I hope through this for the Chair, to have where we are, where we were in 2015, 16, 17 and 18. And so has the previous strategy really worked and bore into improving the results of our children?
Thank you, Councillor. I'll take the first part of that in terms of the improvement for the last 3 years. That comes through our next report coming to this committee next month, and that's our standards and quality report. Iris and I will both be in attendance. That report is ready, and it has all the data that you mentioned in terms of the Ofsted changes, but all the other data throughout the key stages from early years to post-16. So that will be coming to you next month with all the data that has been validated by central government. In terms of the effectiveness of the strategy on the ground with our schools, I'd like to pass that over to Iris.
We work very closely with our schools, particularly those schools where circumstances, the circumstances change. So they may not have a head teacher, they may have had an inspection which hasn't been the outcome that the school was expecting. And so in terms of the way that we are working with those schools to move them forward, we have in place pre-inspection visits that we do with our schools, and we do everything that we can to prepare them prior to inspection and following that. And part of that is to look at their tracking data and the ongoing progress that the pupils are making.
Thank you. Councillor Sweeting, is there anything else you wish to add?
Yes, what concerns me are those schools that may have excellent teaching, excellent governance, but have got external factors that are creating problems for that school. And I was just wondering whether you could explain how a school in my own ward that has a high number of SEND children, a high number of children with education, health and care plans, a high number of traveller children, and a high turbulence in the housing, so that you've got lots of pupils coming in, out, which disturbs a class. So how is this strategy and the support that you can give as officers able to support schools in those circumstances, especially if they're academy schools where the link is not quite so strong as obviously maintained schools?
So in terms of, I'll go backwards, in terms of our academy schools, we work very closely with the Regional Schools Commissioner's Office, and we locally have the intelligence that you've said with the external factors, especially with housing and the movement and having Heathrow locally, and it impacts our schools in the south of the borough. And when Ofsted inspectors come in, IRIS and the school improvement links will always work with the Ofsted team that are at the school inspecting for 2 days to ensure they understand the full context that the school is in and what they're experiencing with the movement and how it relates with other schools that don't have the same impact, to ensure that their inspection is undertaken fairly. So for academies, we do still work very closely with the Regional Schools Commissioner's Office, and where the academy school engages with the local authority, we will absolutely support them. If multi-academy trusts choose not to engage with the local authority due to the legislation, then we will go through the Regional Schools Commissioner's Office and still support that school via the third-party route. With our maintained schools, we support the schools with all the aspects of external factors, with Heathrow and housing and other areas that we could have also in the central and north of the borough. All schools face different issues, and what we have done is create 3 patches where our school improvement links work with those schools, so they get to know the factors that all those schools within that area of that patch, the north, the central and the south, have, to share good practice, to see how another school is managing those external impacts, and how the school that may not have the right resources, how they can take on the good practice from another school. That's just one example. Iris and her team have lots of other ways of working, strategies to support schools in that need, but I can pass over to Iris.
We also have some very good examples of schools with varying demographic that who are faced with numerous challenges, as you mentioned, who always have put those children first and create opportunities within their own schools to develop those children. They would put in place, they engage their own speech therapists, they may engage their own educational psychologist, they may have provision for parent support groups within their schools. We're fortunate also, working within the Civic Centre, that we have those links with special educational needs, with other agencies that support those schools. And if when we do visit a school, we notice there are issues, we can very quickly link with colleagues here to make sure that they're addressing and supporting those schools as well.
Thank you very much. Councillor Vardia.
Thank you. Not all pupils that have a special educational need have an EHCP, and it's not unusual to find examples where a school could have 15% of their pupils with a special educational need and only 2 or 3% of them have the formal EHCP. Does the council support the schools where this is happening? Because I think a lot of us are governors on various schools, and these are the types of issues that we're hearing from the head teachers.
As school improvement links, we're linked with schools and provide varying models of support depending on where the school is on its journey. And part of that is to observe teaching and the quality of teaching. And our expectation is that through quality first teaching, we would expect the school to be prepared and to support children at all levels in terms of inclusion. So we would be expecting to see differentiation within the classroom, and we would be expecting the school to be tracking the progress of those pupils. So we measure two things. We measure attainment and we measure progress. And of course, for some children with a learning difficulty, they may not have the attainment, but the progress that they make will be phenomenal. And that's what we look at when we're engaging with schools, and certainly when we're looking at their tracking data. The types of questions that we will be asking is about challenge. So how are you challenging your more able? And how are you catering for those children who at some point in their school career may have a learning need and will need additional support? Because it's not always about children having that support from an additional adult. It's about the teacher being responsible for providing quality first teaching within that classroom for all of those children at different levels. And that's what we do in terms of holding our schools to account. Does that help?
Thank you. Councillor Vardia, do you wish to ask a supplementary?
If a head teacher approached you and explained that they were struggling to provide the level of education that they wanted for all of their pupils and their SEN pupils, is it the role of the council, or does the council then step in and help them cope?
What normally would, the normal thing that would happen is that they would contact us first. We would then go into the school, and because we have a wide range of experience in looking at schools, all of the team members have been head teachers and Ofsted inspectors, so we have a very broad view of the expectations of what we would expect a school to be providing. Sometimes schools that do it very well, cater for children very well, become the school of choice for many parents, and sometimes that can create an imbalance in terms of numbers in school. Schools would come to us in the first instance, and as I said, we would then go and discuss this with our SEN colleagues and point them in the direction of that school so that the issues raised by the head teacher could be dealt with. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Mavis.
Thank you. Can I ask what the council actually does in terms of resourcing schools improvement team or the partnership? So in terms of, are there enough officers to implement and to monitor different strategic plans? And you spoke about the strategy that by all parties was done within current resources. So I suppose the kind of dream question of, if there was extra resource, which is the area which it should be prioritised?
Okay, thank you, Councillor. At the moment, the team is resourced appropriately to manage the needs. Because we're using our partnership model, we're getting a lot of support from our teaching schools. So central government have designed, the last few years, a new model where school improvement utilises practitioners, head teachers that are currently delivering school improvement and working with them. So if we did have an increased budget for additional support, it should be put within the partnership model, building on that, creating more resource within the partnership model, and growing the LEAP, the Local Education Area Partnership, and supporting our schools that are at great risk of decline. So the money should be spent on building the partnership model, and I can pass over to Iris, who has experience on that area.
I think, the strength of working together, schools working together and sharing that expertise. The children in your school today may be in someone else's school tomorrow. And I think it's about sharing that level of expertise and sharing what you have within your school, the things that work, the things that maybe don't work, and schools will gain strength from that. The other way forward is, of course, through peer reviews. So you have schools working together, led by an advisor, who are able to go into other schools and see things working and in practice, which maybe they can take back to their own schools. So I think sometimes resources, you can have the resources, it's about how you use them, how efficiently and effectively they can be used to the benefit of everybody, really.
Do you wish to follow up, Councillor Mavis?
Yes. It's my understanding, and I may be wrong, that like alternative provisions would also be under your remits in terms of PRUs and bits in terms of the standard of education. And I'm just wondering kind of how much they're fed into learning from schools and other different education providers in order to enhance the education for those who have been or may be at risk of exclusion.
I think what we do, in terms of the intelligence we collect from going into lots of different schools, we try to signpost our schools to schools that are doing it well. Certainly, schools that have specialist units attached. We have some very good work going on in our special schools that we can tap in on as a resource. And I think where there's been an increase in some particular needs of children, we've been able to do that very, very successfully. In particular, autism, you know, where we've been able to draw on the experiences and expertise of those special schools. It's worked very well.
Thank you. Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I'd like to thank Iris and Ronnie for their very much in-depth report, but moreoverly, the way that you've answered the questions and the clarity that you've answered them to the committee. Well done, both of you. Thank you.
Councillor Markham.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? We've just spent, quite rightly, a considerable amount of time talking about those with special needs, which comes back to the importance of us knowing how much money is actually allocated. You know, you keep talking about resources and more or less. I'd like to know what we're talking about in pounds, shilling and ounces. But I think it's also important to remember that we've got 51,000 children, and they all seem to be doing all right. And I think it's terrific, and I think we mustn't forget the many, and rather than just concentrating on the few. So, you know, terrific.
Okay. We've been on this point for quite some time now, so I will take one more from Councillor Sweeting to finish us off, and then we'll move on to the next item on education.
How do you measure what the schools think about the strategy? Because at the end of the day, schools are very good at putting, you know, of saying whether they approve it or it's been successful. So how do you actually measure that? Do you audit them? Do you ask them that question? How is that information, you know, fed through the information that you need to have to improve matters as it goes forward?
So working through our LEAP with our teaching schools and our other head teacher partnership board, SSPB, School Strategic Partnership Board, this strategy is developed by them with the local authority in partnership, and this current strategy is going out to consultation. It's gone to our higher level groups and then it's coming to members before finalising it, so we get all comments and contribution in terms of the previous strategy, what worked well, what didn't work, and what the gaps are within this strategy, so we can make the amendments to ensure that the next 3 years are secured within here and we're focused in the right direction. But in terms of the stakeholder voice from the head teachers, the senior leaders from our schools, and as Councillor Markham mentioned about the parents for us to go back to our head teachers to say, for them to share it onwards with their parent group stakeholders. We are always consulting on the work that we do in school improvement and asking for feedback to have that continuous improvement. So this strategy will be consulted widely with all stakeholders, and then it will be finalised.
A follow-up, Councillor Sweeton?
A very quick one. And are all schools signed up to it? Or do you have any schools, for whatever reason, that are much more tentative in working with you on this strategy?
So we've been very lucky with our School Strategic Partnership Board having a wide representation from our secondary schools, primary schools and our special schools, and also our governing body. So we have representation for all areas, and they are all on board with this strategy and have fed back, and it's now filtering outwards to the wider schools community. And in the past we've had full success with all schools being part of this strategy and signed up to it, and the way we are delivering it this time is through our partnership board, School Strategic Partnership Board, LEAP, and then our primary and secondary executive groups. And the strategy then is sent onwards to the primary and secondary and special schools through their executive groups. So it feels more like a partnership strategy rather than a local authority strategy.
And I think that's been the success of this document, is that we've taken the time to consult and to take those opinions of all of the stakeholders that we've consulted with, and have made those amendments as and when they've raised them, or at least we've discussed them and come to a conclusion.
Thank you very much, and on behalf of the committee, thank you for your attendance this evening. Whenever you're free to go. Item 6 is our quarterly school places planning updates, including September this year. Welcome to Sarah and Dan. Whenever you're ready, please address the committee.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an update, and it shows you the big picture about the October roles in primary and secondary. So, as Councillor Markham has clearly read, we got over 51,000 pupils across the nursery to sixth form, special AP, the whole thing. 48,500 in the mainstream primary and secondary places. The demand for the primary places has clearly plateaued, but it's not going down. It's not still rising. When you look at the number on the chart that's on, it shows that for about the last 10 years, it's been about 3,950 plus or minus another 50 coming into reception every year. And that's now leading the total primary school roles to be pretty much steady. That's almost more important for the issues around our secondary numbers than it is for the primary numbers. The fact that every year of primary school intake has been about the same. What we've got is we have got surplus places in some primary schools. As has been said, it concentrates in a few schools, and we're taking action with them. Some of the academy trusts are currently consulting on proposals to reduce their planned admission number by 30, or in one case by 60, and the council isn't opposing those because we feel that that makes sense across the piece, and parents will still have a good choice of local school, but we will be dealing with having some of the problems caused by low rolls, where there was some movement between schools sometimes and a mismatch. So some schools had too many small classes that weren't viable. So we hope that we've got that under control. What we are also trialling for the first time is informal caps on certain year groups. So where most of our primary schools have got a planned admission number of 90 in a year, and some of them have got one or more year groups where they're below 60, and they say, and they're quite quick. They've found my phone number, email. They're very quick to say, look, I've got 58. We've had 58 for ages in this year group. They're in 2 classes now. But if we take 3 more pupils, we'd go over 60, and we'd have 61, and we'd have to have another teacher, maybe another assistant as well, and in fact we'd have to reorganise all 61 pupils. We don't open a class for one, so that everybody has to be rejigged between the classes. And absolutely, I've spoken with Iris, there have been some schools where that's happened, and they are schools that have had school improvement problems, because the pupils have suddenly changed teachers. At worst, one of them changed from 3 to 2 to 3 twice or 3 times within 2 years, and it really did have an impact. So we think that we've pretty much got a lid as far as we can. There are some exceptions on that, and we're trying to, we will be telling parents in some instances that they can't go to a school even though the PAN hasn't been reached, because it would cause too much disruption to their child and to other children, but that we're able to offer them places that in many cases are closer to their home, and that's what we're trying for this year. So far, I have to say, having really agonised over this, it's never come to pass that we've reached the cap in any of these schools, but now I've said that, tomorrow will be the day. So we feel that we're making progress on the primary numbers, but as you'll read on the individual planning areas, and I've attached a map near the back, because they're not now quite the same as ward areas. There are some issues always, there would be, with 70 odd schools and thousands of individual children, but we're feeling a lot more happy, but aware that there's a lot of uncertainty about whether some roles are suddenly going to rise again. What will happen if a actual decision is taken on Heathrow, either way, on the expansion, because we know that there's been quite a lot of temporary accommodation and impacts on schools, and as a result, but it could change again. At secondary, what's clear is that these large numbers are now coming through from primary, and it's been quite a shock. You know, it's 300 more pupils in a year going into secondary. Obviously, there were plans. Lots of our secondary schools have been enlarged with high-quality new buildings and facilities, and that's actually led many parents to apply for them. But even so, we've had to, in the end, add temporary extra places or talk with the secondary schools in partnership and ask them to increase Year 7 intake beyond their planned admission number, because reception and Year 7, as you know, are filled not by rational bureaucrats sort of working out who lives near a school and filling them up neatly, but it is the parents who choose their preferences up to 6 for each school, and that can lead to quite an awkward situation where schools fill up, there are gaps, and where you've got spaces is then beyond 2 miles, which is a reasonable distance for primary, for us to say children must go there. So that happens at primary. At secondary, it gets even worse, because we've only got 18 schools across the second largest area of any borough in London. And so you're talking about a 12-mile distance from the top one to the most northern one to the south, and difficult transport links. And so we can end up with vacant places in secondary schools, but it being, and pupils needing to have offers, but that they just will not match, and this year we looked, as last year, we looked over 5 different schools from north to south to create some extra places to make sure that we could get a good offer to meet parents, because as you're probably aware, Monday will be the day that parents will get their offer, and most of them will get one of their top preferences. That'll all be still being crunched, and we'll be telling the schools this week exactly how many children, who they are. So they've all got places. That's the big picture on that. But we have had to add extra in, and so on secondary, the big issue is, now that we know that we've got the same kind of size of year groups coming through every year, that having discussions and plans and proposals to find a permanent solution, a positive new construction for that. Okay.
Thank you very much. I will invite questions from members. Before I do so, I won't be declaring a peculiar or non-peculiar interest, but for the sake of transparency, I will just say for the record, I am one of those parents who will be hearing from the council on Monday with my own daughter's school place. So I just wanted to put that on record for transparency. Starting with Councillor Markham.
Thank you. There's a bit of deja vu. I mean, we meet up every 3 months, and I suspect that we will be asking some of the same questions that we ask every quarter. But my feeling is that you guys, really on top of everything. I mean, you know what the problems are. I've got a couple of questions, really. The first thing is that I'm well aware of what's happening next week, and I'm really looking forward already to the next quarterly report, just to see how well we actually did and how many parents actually got their children into the right school. Can I just ask, how many of the 51,000 children actually live in this borough?
Roughly 15% don't overall, and roughly 15% of the residents choose to go to other schools outside the borough. So therefore, we've got sometimes I sort of think, well, we've got 115% that we're dealing with. We've got the children in our schools, we've got our residents. So when I'm liaising with SEN colleagues, for example, they're very fixed on the SEN responsibility being for the borough's residents. But then some of the pupils with SEN are from other boroughs, because particularly, well, not the maps are quite, I'm fascinated by the maps, and I didn't know the borough before I came, so that makes me much more curious. But obviously, there are a number of schools that are right on the boundary, and so that does mean that having said the average is 15%, it goes from 0 to 65% in different secondary schools, for example.
Second one, really, one of the common issues has been space. How much space there is available for schools to take additional students. So perhaps with James Rogers here, who's head of planning, it'd just be interesting to know really, that what constraints are there on schools who want temporary accommodation, maybe just for 3 or 4 years. Are there any planning constraints, or are there...
If I were to quickly off the cuff, the 3 constraints I'd particularly be looking at are, is it greenbelt? But I'd caveat that a very large number of our schools are already in the greenbelt, so there's an inherent difficulty to start with there. But then we'd look at floodplain maps. So I know that straight off the top of my head that Queensmead, in terms of the secondary part, that's in the floodplain. But there are other secondary schools that don't have any land in the floodplain. So what that means is that your school that isn't in the floodplain, they've got a complete blank canvas, in effect, almost for where they put a temporary building. But Queensmead would have constraints because there are clearly complications of siting a temporary building in the floodplain. The other big thing is development on playing fields. The view that Sport England tend to take, so we'd have to consult Sport England when putting something on a playing field, is they tend to be more flexible with temporary buildings. So it's the permanent buildings or expansions that are more likely for us to receive an objection. And Sport England have this unique position as a consultee, so I can consult residents associations, whole manner of organisations, and effectively, should we, as I, if it's delegated, or the planning committee, if it's a committee item, so wish, we could overrule them. But with Sport England, you have to refer to a Secretary of State to overrule a Sport England objection to loss of playing field. So there's a whole big layer of bureaucracy, but thankfully Sport England are usually quite flexible so long as it's temporary.
So the key question there is, how long is temporary? I mean, how long is a piece of string? So when they say they will allow temporary buildings, how long can a temporary building be there?
Well, they expect us to condition that it's temporary so.
Well, I mean,
if the council gave a 3 years. The council gave a 3-year temporary permission, and 3 years later is renewing it, and there's no sign of a full planning application to extend the school. At that point, Sport England might object. So you're normally okay on the first application. It's when you get renewal after renewal, then if Sport England draw a line in the sand, then there are. It could be taken out of our hands, whereas with most other material planning considerations, the ultimate decision rests with us as a local planning authority. So it would probably be those three. Obviously, with local residents, they will always raise parking, but I'd mention the other three first.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sweeting.
Thank you very much, Chair. A couple of things to clarify. First of all, can I thank officers for the report, because it's a very much fuller report than we had last time. But what's missing is information on the cohort survival rates, which will provide us with a better understanding of the numbers actually in our primaries and how there's a loss, a significant loss, as they reach year 7 in secondary. I just want to also clarify that the number of year 7 places as of this September is actually 3791. That's taking out the 60 from Harefield and adding the 100 on schools of yet to be identified. So before I start, can you just clarify if that's the case?
So with schools, secondary schools, through the process that Sarah's described, have offered additional school places for this coming September, totalling 145. We've actually been offered more, but we haven't used all of those because we haven't needed to. So there's an additional 145 effectively bulge year places which haven't required any additional classroom accommodation, and that's because schools have sort of jigged their timetables and freed up space in their schools.
But the report says 100.
I should clarify, it was 100, it was correct at the time of writing. Since between us submitting this report and subsequently there's an extra 45 that's been included. And your first question was, survival rate. So one of the things in terms of our modelling that we do is that we track the, I suppose, the numbers that move through from one year to the next, to the next, to the next, and particularly focus on what we describe as the transition point from year 6, so end of primary, moving into year 7, start of secondary. And that transition ratio is typically around 96-97%. So in other words, in headcount terms, about 96% of year 6s move into year 7. But it's a bit more complicated than that because some go out of the borough, some come into the borough, but in terms of headcount, it's about that.
Councillor Sweden.
Well, the issues I've got on two levels. Can I first of all say about primary? The increase in capacity in our primary schools in certain areas of the borough has been very considerable, and I applaud the council for putting in the extra places. But this is actually now causing primaries some problems. I mean, I was surprised, for example, that Northwood has overcapacity, and yet we've expanded a school in Northwood very recently. And we've got a school that was expanded in the Pinkwell ward, which went from, a 3 form of entry to a 5 form of entry. Very expensive. We don't know those places. So I'm asking the same question as I asked last time. Have we put too many primary school places in?
So, I mean, we at the time of commissioning those places, the forecast showed that we need those places, and in some cases, and I think Pinkwell may have been one of those schools. They were full in the expanded year groups for at least 2 or 3 years. But there have been some changes that really in demographics right across London, which seems to be mainly driven by, I guess, job prospects, affordability of housing, amongst other things, and it's meant that a number of families have moved out of higher cost housing areas into more affordable areas. And they're the choices that families make, and it is always, I mean, you're probably fed up with me saying this, but it isn't an exact science, and there are lots of individual choices that families make, as well as some forecasting factors like birth rate and migration that we have to take into account. But I think my message from me to the committee is that it naturally will ebb and flow over 20 to 30 years, with all sorts of reasons. And I think what's really important, and it is very much, I think, a success story for this council, is that every child has been offered a school place on time, every time.
Thank you very much.
Can I now come on to secondary? Yes, I see that you've managed to, with 3836, manage the cohort coming up into year 7. But that's by asking certain schools to take bulge years. We don't know, the report doesn't tell us which schools. But that's a temporary measure. Our minute said that we need a further 8 forms of entry in 2 years' time. I'll say it slowly, in 2 years' time. And we have been very, very small amounts of surplus unfilled places for our year 7, down to just over 1%, when government says we should have a little bit of movement there, 5%, between 5 and 10%. And what worries me, what concerns me, is that we have children in our primaries, and you can see the cohort, the information you've got, it goes way up to 4,240. That's in, I think, currently in year 3, although it might be year 2. I wasn't quite certain on when these figures were taken. And remembering that we've actually only got about 3,750 permanent places. So there's the difference. And what worries me is that not only have we got to provide more places, and we've been talking about this since I became a councillor, and yet we still have not got any firm plans. Where is the new school going? Where are the final, the expansions going? And we have actually got cohorts coming through, and these cohorts may well need to be upped in number because of the extras coming into our the additional housing capacity in certain areas. So it is not a perfect science, and I know it's not a perfect science, and I know that a lot of work has been happening with this, but we do now need to have something that we can pass on to the head of planning, because these children are actually in our schools. And I would also say that I was surprised that we've now got 15 forms of entry going from the south of the borough to the north, and 4 forms of entry going from the south of the borough into Slough Grammars. Now, without that, we would have been hard-pressed, I think, last September, because 120, that's a lot, that went out borough. And that was the reason why the cohort went down from application day to when those bottoms came into our year 7. So we were very, very fortunate, I think. But the numbers are still going up. And I asked the question, seeing that we've got all these forms of entry going into to the north of the borough from the south and out borough from the south, has not the council got to look at a new school for the south, which would not only accommodate those in the south, but it would take the pressure off the north? And I think the time has come when we need to look borough-wide for that site. But I would also ask, please let's have some firm information, because I think we need that.
Thank you. I mean, we do work very closely with James's team, and you'll be hopefully assured to know. Between us, we are briefing cabinet members in detail on the options available, but also the options that have been put forward to us by the ESFA, who have responsibility for identifying the sites for a new free school that they've approved. So we've, in fact, over the last couple of weeks, we've been briefing members on the position, not just for September 20, but also for the next 2-3 years. And there is an option that's been presented to members. But in addition for the new school, but in addition to that, we're looking and have firm proposals to expand a school in the south by 1.5 FE. And we've also looked at options in the past, and it's still very much available and on the table for expanding to further schools in the south. Now, in terms of feasibility studies previously, the challenges with expanding existing schools is that you often have to reconfigure parts of the school site, because over 20 or 30 years there's been incremental building development, and therefore proportionately, for one extra form of entry, one extra year group, you tend to have a higher unit cost. But we have been, and we continue to work with schools to ensure that there are extra places available where they're needed, when they're needed, and we're keeping a very close eye on things. So we're hoping that we'll be in a position, what's subject to further, I guess, feasibility studies, that we'll be in a position to confirm what the position is to this committee. But we're just not at a stage to confirm that at this point in time until some of those studies have concluded.
Thank you. We have been discussing this for a while now. I do have a number of other members wishing to ask questions. Can I just respectfully request that members keep their questions brief? It's in the benefit of this committee that they do keep them brief, so that it allows me to give more members more questions. Mr. Little.
Thank you, Chair. As you will have heard from earlier discussions, one of the concerns that we have had, and I've had in particular, has been about special needs. And there isn't a separate section in this report dealing with special needs, but what we're getting in terms of budget is a very rapidly expanding cohort of people who are getting extra funding for special needs. We're having problems with capacity in terms of special schools. We're having difficulty with, presumably, the number of special units within mainstream schools. Do you think we ought to have a separate section in these reports and have a clearer indication of the plans going forward to cope with this quite significant increase that we're getting? And can I make a very small plea that in these charts that we've got in here, we could have slightly heavier type or slightly bigger type to see them? Thank you.
Just to respond very quickly to that, I think that's a good suggestion, and we'll take that on board for future reports.
Thank you. Councillor Mavis? No? Okay. Just smiling at me then. Councillor Kaufman?
Yeah, just brief.
The microphone, please.
Just a brief update on what Councillor Sweeting said. If a school is, I say trading, if it has more pupils than it should have we got provision within the council to actually say, right, we can actually put up some temporary buildings or classrooms or whatever to ease the sort of congestion within the actual school? And I'm referring to South Ruislip Ward. We have 3 primaries there, and I think most of them are struggling with capacity or lack of capacity of building.
We do have provision in our council budget, recently approved by council last week, for temporary classrooms, but we obviously have to look at it on a site-by-site basis, but it depends what the need is, but we'd certainly have a conversation with the school.
Councillor Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just to help Councillor Sweeting out a little bit, I know the area that she was talking about north of the borough, and I know the 2 schools in particular. The issues we do have of that area is outside the borough. We're looking at South Oxley, not Harrow, but South Oxley, where one school has 60% from South Oxley. So, how these officers can sort of like turn around with figures on here and then turn around and say, well, it's very, very difficult. And apologies to the officers. These figures that you're showing here are obviously Hillingdon pupils. How much consideration do you take looking at the likes of South Oxley, Harrow, Hounslow, to be able to ascertain your growth?
I go to 2 meetings nearly every term. One is all London boroughs place planning, and there's a formal agenda, but everyone has time to nabble, their neighbouring people and talk, and then we follow it up with emails. But we also have a North West London one, and South Oxley and the Pinner sort of overlap are things that I have spent much time on, because what's interesting is that there are several schools in Harrow just along the Pinner, just over the border in Pinner, primary schools, and that really then creates quite a surplus capacity, even though it looks like we've only got a couple of schools up there. And it does sound as though the South Oxley schools and South Watford primary schools have become a lot more popular with their local population, who are now having, you could say competition forced them to do that, but and therefore people are not travelling into the borough as they were. But I think the biggest issue is just that a lot of the the houses aren't selling. There aren't new families moving into that corner either.
Do you have a follow-up? Yep.
We're also going on to the secondary schools, and it was mentioned that we are close to capacity. Unfortunately, the likes of one school in north of the borough is actually having great problems in even getting 50% of its capacity, and they are actually talking about perhaps closing it because they can't make ends meet. Are we actually talking to that college and seeing what we can do from there?
So obviously I'll be careful not to name the school, but we are in close dialogue with the ESFA to try to understand the position better, but we just don't know what the position is at this point in time. But I understand that the DFE, the Department for Education, are keeping it under review.
Thank you very much, Councillor Markham.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind everybody that we've been talking about a relatively small number of students who may or may not have problems, something like 150, which means that 49,900 and something have got their first choice. And I think officers are to be congratulated for making sure that so many children, so many parents, do get their children into their first choice. So I just think, credit where credit is due. Thank you very much indeed.
Mr. Little?
A small point of clarification, if I may. On page 40, there's a set of bullet points in paragraph 8, or a set of sub-points, and one of them talks about new people moving into the south of the borough as being new arrivals. Do they mean new arrivals to the country or just new arrivals to the borough?
It can be neither.
Could you switch the microphone on?
We do have quite detailed information, but obviously we haven't got it for the purposes of this report.
Thank you. I'm going to finish off this item now with a final question from Councillor Sweeting, and we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's recognised that there are very many variables in trying to know how many youngsters are going to be in our year reception and year 7. And because of that, I think it's very important that we do keep to a reasonable amount of wriggle room. So is it still the case that we are heading towards a 5% of unfilled places in our year 7? Are we heading for that, or are we still heading for a 1% of unfilled places for this September coming?
So it does ebb and flow. So National Offer Day, we tend to always have more children because and then we go through a process of parents either accepting or declining those offers, and depending on the options available to some of those parents, and some parents will decline their state-funded school place in favour of an independent school place. So it will drop down, but you're right. The suggested guideline is about 5%, but we won't be reaching that. There'll be less than that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We will move now on to our next item, which is the Community Infrastructure Levy. Good evening to James, Rebecca and Andrew. Whenever you're ready, please go ahead with your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to very quickly introduce the three of us, and then I'm going to pass to Rebecca, who's actually going to talk you through the report, and then the three of us will take any questions from the committee. So just to clarify, as I think you all know, I'm the head of planning, so Section 106 and SIL does sit under me. Rebecca Yee is called our infrastructure planning manager, and she manages also an apprentice that helps her with the community infrastructure, levy collection and management of our SIL. And then she is ably supported by Andrew McLeod, who is from our a principal accountant, with the various accounting that comes with SIL. So I'll pass to Rebecca, and as I say, after Rebecca's presented, the three of us will sort of alternate answering questions, if that's okay.
Good evening. The report provides the committee with information on the Council's current monitoring and reporting arrangement for the Hillingdon Community Infrastructure Levy, the income and expenditure. The SIL is a mechanism to allow local planning authority to seek to raise funds from new development in the forms of a levy or local land tax in order to contribute to the cost of infrastructure projects such as transportation, education, health care facilities, libraries, leisure facilities, open spaces and community facilities. And Regulation 62 of the SIL Act recommends the Council need to report annually on the collection and spending of SIL expenses. This particular report focuses on Hillingdon SIL, which is the local borough SIL, not the mayoral SIL, because there are two types of SIL. The mayoral SIL is the London Mayor's funding mechanism for the Crossrail funding but this particular report focused on our own local seal. Our own local seal was adopted in July 2014. Since then onwards, every year we publish our seal annual monitoring report on the council website on the collection, spending, and all the details of how the council allocate expenses for various infrastructure. And point number one, I like to focus on the budget forecast. How do we actually forecast how much seal would we actually be able to collect every year? We look at the number of planning applications granted, and then after the developers confirm that they will commence work, and then we send them the demand notices for the collection of seal. So just to note that not every one planning application would attract seal. There may be about 6 or 7 applications for the same site, but only one will come through. And for the last 5 years that we've been collecting seal, on page 50, there is a little table addressing the lump sum collected every year. This year, the forecast is roughly about over £4 million. Last financial year is 3.2 million. 17-18, 3.4 million. 16-17, 3.6. The first year, obviously, it was a lot less because we only adopted it in August. So it's 1.9 million. And the monitoring and reporting to Cabinet, in terms of the seal monitoring, the collection of seal, we report to the regular Cabinet report, medium financial strategy forecast, and regularly about the projection of seal and the forecast. 5% of the administration fee is accredited to the planning department in terms of admin expenses like cost of how to run seal and associated expenditures. The seal money has been used to support financing of the council's very popular program called Chrysalis. I'm sure members are very familiar with that particular program. It was actually very welcomed by local people, local ward members, and we used Chrysalis to support a lot of local infrastructure funding. And I'd like to report that although 15% of the total Hillingdon seal should be allocated what we call a neighbouring seal. However, this council has afforded over £1 million for Chrysalis program, and accordingly it's over roughly about 30%. So, and it's continuing every year, and a lot of local residents really welcome that particular program, and also local ward members as well. Chrysalis program different in range from £5,000 to £100,000, so it can be catering for some local initiative outdoor gym, or maybe a range of upgrading fitness levels equipment for all age range groups. And throughout the year, residents and councillors and officers for projects to receive Chrysalis funding would group all the bidding questionnaire application form together, and accordingly, the cabinet member would coordinate, the range of assessment. There is a statutory annual report request mechanism due to the seal regulations. Every year, as earlier on I mentioned, that we need to publish our statutory seal monitoring report on the website, and the total seal amount received every year would be a monitoring of the financial year before. So the charging authority, like Hillingdon Council, would publish the report no later than the 31st of December every year. there is a new initiative recommended by the latest seal regulation in September 2019, which means that the government is encouraging infrastructure funding to include both Section 106 and seal together. So the forthcoming December in 2020, the seal funding statement will collate both seal and Section 106 together. That will be a full report, because currently seal report and Section 106 report are separated. But this forthcoming year is the pilot for the first year that the two will be combined together. The requirement of the report will be more or less the same for the collection of seal. How much seal have you collected? How much seal funding have you allocated? Are there any outstanding seal not spent or not allocated? So far, Hillingdon is very successful. We spend every penny. There is nothing that is left behind that we have nothing to allocate. So in terms of the authorities focusing on the contribution received, through the seal regime, the new infrastructure funding statement also recommend, besides seal, Section 106, they also recommend, if councils are happy, you can put in the Section 278 highway agreements as well, included in the whole report, but that is not compulsory. It's according to what the council preferred. So currently the planning staff and the finance staff and other colleagues, including housing, are working together for the forthcoming infrastructure funding statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. I invite questions from members, and we'll start with Councillor Markham.
Thank you. Can we just look at page 56, which is the list of expenditure? I noticed that the income is, round figures, 3.5 million. Yeah. I noticed that just over 2 million of that has been allocated to highways structural works, which I guess is road resurfacing and pavements. What I'm interested in is which leaves 1.5, but I'm interested in the 600 grand plus outdoor sports and play facilities. I just wondered who is responsible for determining where that money is going to be spent, because personally I would have thought educational improvements would be slightly more important than outdoor sports and play facilities.
Yes, the outdoor sports and play facilities form part of the projects that are agreed approved in the Chrysalis programme. So the whole of the Chrysalis programme, the entirety of the spend, which is a little over £1 million per annum, is being funded from SIL as sort of local neighbourhood projects. So a large tranche of the Chrysalis spend relates to outdoor sports and play facilities rather than education, although SIL is obviously eligible to fund education as well.
Councillor Malcolm, do you wish to follow up? Or?
No.
Okay. Councillor Sweeting.
I just want some clarity, really, because I thought that Democratic Services was contacting the chairman concerning this report. I'm not certain whether that's happened or not, but basically this report was requested at 2 meetings of the Central and South Planning Committee, and what they asked for, and it was agreed, I believe, by the whole committee, was that we should have the SIL money provided in a report by ward, and I believe that my colleague Councillor Duncan contacted an officer to ask whether this would be happening, could happen, and was given the assurance, yes, it could happen. So what the committee, the Central and South Planning Committee, wanted, I believe, was in much the same way as Section 106 monies are identified by the development and by the ward and by the amount, the SIL money should be dealt with in the same way. And as I say, Councillor Duncan spoke to the head of Democratic Services, who spoke to an officer in Democratic Services, and although it was going to be too late for this report, that the next one would need to be the requirements that the Central and South Planning Committee requested. And I know that Councillor Duncan has spoken to Jean Palmer as well as Paul Wayman on this issue. So that's where we were coming from. This is a very laudable report, but it's not actually what the Central and South Planning Committee thought was going to come to this committee.
If I can perhaps answer this. So this has gone slightly around the houses, and then there was a point where I know I agreed with Democratic Services. We do an annual SIL monitoring report through RESPOC. So, but I'm not sure about what happened before that. But if I can answer the question, there is a difference between Section 106 and SIL, and I'll quickly explain it as simply as I can. So Section 106 is something specific to the site and the development. So if we have a development in a particular ward and it's causing problems on a junction potentially right next to the site, we might want the junction improved. So that's a site-specific kind of matter that then gets addressed, and that's why it's 106. SIL is different. It's basically a levy, or well, it's a tax in effect, and the council can spend the money effectively on a much wider area on infrastructure improvements. Where the regulations do require councils to focus on at a more neighbourhood level is the 15% rule, and we do that through Chrysalis. In fact, about 30% ultimately is spent through Chrysalis, and Chrysalis actually works very well in complying with the legislation, because if you just look at how Chrysalis is spent every year, it's spent all over the borough in effect, and it seems to be spread quite evenly as far as I can tell. But the problem with SIL in terms of this breaking it down and trying to report it on a ward level is and I will pass to Andrew, is if we take the highway structural works, it might help if Andrew explains how highways is financed, and then it perhaps may become apparent how difficult it would be to break SIL down the way we can easily break down 106 and report on a ward-by-ward basis.
I believe Councillor Sweeting wished to clarify a question, is it?
I would need to clarify it. We realise that SIL money can be spent wherever, apart from the 15% that needs to be sort of a strategic to the sort of area, which is the report that has provided that in respect of Chrysalis. But what we want, what the committee, the Central and South Planning Committee, agreed totally, was that the SIL money relates to a development. So if there's a block of flats going into South Ruislip, it's in South Ruislip ward, there's that block of flats generating that amount of SIL money. That's quite an easy exercise. Much more difficult will be where that SIL money will be spent, and that's recognised. Sometimes it's going to be spent on highway improvements throughout the borough, but it will be possible to identify where the SIL money actually comes from. That will be part one. And part two, when it comes to identifying how it's been spent, some of that information could be it's been spent borough-wide on repairing roads, it's been spent borough-wide on updating our libraries. But the first part, where the SIL money actually was generated, will be quite an easy thing to do, and we were advised of that by an officer only a couple of days ago.
I'm not going to say to the committee officers won't do anything, but what I will try to explain is how it certainly isn't easy. So 106 in a planning committee report, it may say 100,000 towards X or Y or junction improvement. SIL is often a sort of staggered or phased payment, so it's inherently more complicated. But I really think it might help if Andrew explains a bit about how highway structural works is dealt with from a finance point of view, and then it might then become slightly apparent rather sort of what I'm struggling with.
Yeah, the highway structural programme is much greater than the £2 million SIL that was used to finance the programme last year. That was just funding a portion of the total spend, because the total highways structural works improvement programme last year was about £5.7 million. So the remaining balance of SIL monies, after applying it to fund the Chrysalis programme, supported the wider investment on highway structural works, with the remaining funding coming from council resources. I think it's important to note that in the council's existing capital budgets, which is sort of reflected in the table in the report on page 50, there's a very high level of infrastructure investment being provided across the borough, including highways and schools expansions and other improvements, of which the SIL monies that we generate each year, £3.5 million or so, is only a small part. So in terms of attributing SIL spend to highway structural works, it's really just a portion of it. We do have information on how the totality of highways spend is spent across specific roads and wards across the borough, but it's financed from other sources as well.
Thank you very much. I know you clarified your last question, Councillor Wayne, but you do have a follow-up if you wish to ask one.
Well, I think we need clarity on this, because I am coming up to this meeting with things which were approved at another meeting, and that there was a formal request, and I've been given indication that that would be possible to do that work. So I'm finding myself struggling on the way forward, especially when I thought that there was going to be a conversation with the chairman about this very issue. So maybe we can minute that we need to have further discussions on this issue.
And for the avoidance of doubt, I have not been contacted, so I just wanted to place that on record as well. So I don't know if we could, Neil, would you like to look into that outside of the meeting and come back to us next time, or if any request has been received?
Yes, I will have to have a look into it, because my understanding is that my understanding is that if a request for information is made by the committee, and the committee is so minded to support that request, then officers will oblige.
If there's been a request, we can do a report to the committee on SIL. I'm not sure it will answer every question the committee wants, simply because the way we're... I guess what I'm saying is if the committee wanted us to replicate the 106 report for SIL, that might not be easy to do. So it would probably have to be a bespoke report on SIL, and then I guess we'd take it from there in effect. What I'll probably do is I will certainly speak to Democratic Services to clarify the position on the Central and South. I think we said Central and South Planning Committee, because my sort of instruction before Christmas was do a report for POC, which obviously we have done.
So I suppose the question is, does this committee wish to have this information as a formal request, Councillor Markham?
Well, I'm not too sure how it will help decision making. I mean, I don't understand why we need this information in the first case. And certainly it's nothing to do just with South. If we have it for South, it has to be borough-wide, doesn't it? I can't quite see how that amount of detail and officer time that will be spent in compiling that information will actually help the decision-making process.
Councillor Sweeten.
I think what I've got from the lead on one of our planning committees is that this will provide the transparency to developers on SIL, that we've got the transparency on section 106s and 278s, and this was requested by a planning committee. So I leave it, to you to move this issue forward.
there is no sort of paperwork before us of what we're actually wanting to see, so I think it's best if Neil takes this offline and looks into it first and then comes back to us with more information, and we can make an informed decision then.
Yeah, through you, Chairman. I think it's important to recognise that a request been made to a different committee. I wasn't at that committee, so I can't comment on what that agreement might be, so I will go offline with James and some other of us and have a look at what it is. It seems to me there's no great appetite for that request to come from this committee, but I will clarify what the request was from the Central and South Committee.
Thank you. Getting back to our questions from other members, Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Chairman. Where you've got a situation where a lot of infrastructure, building has gone on within an area, housing, etc. I don't see any sort of indication here where 106 or SIL are spent on doctors' surgeries, etc. Now we've got a massive amount of new properties being developed, but there's nothing that says there will be any increase in doctors' surgeries within the area. How does this work?
Okay, this is an interesting one. So I may go straight to examples if I may. So on the much bigger development sites, we have negotiated with developers to try and get health facilities. So one that is in the pipeline, and I'm going to do touch wood because for reasons I will come to, I do not want to jinx it, is the vinyl factory site in Hayes. There is a phase of that development which is hopefully delivering a 900 square metre health facility with GP surgeries, but some of these have fallen through in the past, so I do not want to jinx that. So I'll come to the bit about why these fall to the wayside. So we, as a planning team, have negotiated sites, and the example that, and I'll go as far as saying annoyed me at the time, was the RF West Drayton site, or Porter's Way as I know it. So we negotiated that a health facility would be provided, but everything we do has to be proportionate. So effectively there was a 5-year timescale, which seemed reasonable, and effectively the developer would provide a shell of a building. It would be transferred to the health authorities, and then so long as the lease was signed, which there was 5 years to sort this out, then the building's transferred to the health authority, and they then do the final fit out, and we have a new GP facility. Unfortunately, despite everything being sorted out as far as we could from the planning perspective, that those particular hurdles that were required, that were beyond the planning team, they put it that way, weren't able to be met. So there was no surgery provided on the site, despite us trying to set everything up as far as we could to enable a surgery. And there's now a Sainsbury's local, I believe, on the site, which came about because the 5 years passed and the developer quite rightly said, well, it's still vacant, we need to apply for something else. So there are sites, and I'm currently involved in negotiations on involving Mandip and the senior planners on some big sites involving facilities, but it tends to be that the focus is more on the 106 side, that we're trying to get the developers to basically fund these facilities. They will build it to a shell, and then it's just sorting out the lease in effect. I'm not saying that's straightforward, but that's where the problem lies. So the planning team, I'd go as far as saying we are delivering some health facilities, but unfortunately they're not all reaching the finish line for reasons that are beyond the local planning authority's control.
Do you have a follow-up, Councillor Kaufman? No? Okay. Councillor Mavis?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was going to mention exactly that, but Sainsbury's is useful. I suppose my question, I think residents do want to know how much seal is generated, how much 106 is generated from big developments, particularly in areas where density is higher, just so they can get a feel for, as infrastructure comes in, the kind of money that's coming back to them from those developers. But my question is around how we can find out more information around where the chrysalis money is spent kind of each year. I may have missed that entirely. Because I don't spread it across.
Much easier for us to respond on. In part, as to be blunt, the regulations require us to do more reporting on how we're delivering 15% to neighbourhoods than the remaining 85% that goes to wider projects. We did attach a link to the end of the report.
On page 54.
On page 54, you'll note there's a chrysalis link. So the electronic version of your papers actually has a link that goes straight to further information.
I could just endorse what James said. I've used that link many times before, and if you do use the link, it will break it down by ward and by year of what has been funded in that year for each ward. Sorry, James, did you wish to continue? Or your mic, please.
So I didn't want to seem earlier as if I was trying to sort of frustrate a very valid question from Councillor Sweeting. It's just our problem is that you've got £2 million worth of highway spend on lamp columns and all sorts of highways infrastructure, and I'm not sure you can perhaps understand my worry of vast spreadsheets of highway expenditure. Are they really helping? Is that really helping you as councillors? So whereas, and I'll just give this, so because I asked colleagues in anticipation of questions, is there information I can break down how this is spent? So I know on the education facilities, it was the Lake Farm Academy and Field End Junior School that were beneficiaries of the money specifically highlighted on page 56. But head of the meetings, Andrew was explaining to me the difficulties of trying to break down those highway structural works because of how our corporate financing and all our mechanisms are set up in effect. So.
Yes. Thank you. Your microphone, Councillor Markham.
Sorry, I think Neil needs to get greater clarification from the Central Planning Committee exactly what they're looking for and why before officers spend any time, which is bound to be very laborious, and there's no point doing things just for the sake of doing things. Thank you.
Yes, I think for the purpose of the minutes, as we said, Councillor Sweden has mentioned that it's raised at planning previously. We've not received any formal request as such to this committee to look at it. I do believe, I endorse what Councillor Markham says, I don't think we need to go into that great level of detail. Having the officers here and being scrutinised in this manner is sufficient, I believe. But if Neil could look into that offline and see, and then if we need to discuss it in the future, we can. Councillor Morgan?
Yeah, just very quickly on that, I believe it's actually possibly the North or Majors that were possibly asking that question. I'm on the Central South, and Councillor Flynn's not on that one.
Apologies to Councillor Mavis, I didn't the follow-up, so...
Thank you, Chair, I appreciate that. My question is how much residents, local communities are involved in. I know there's the chrysalis funding is advertised with the council and through the councillors, etc., etc. But how much they're engaged in consultation around not just the planning of these big infrastructures, but actually how the CO or 106 money would be spent, and kind of what dialogue there is with residents, consult them on what infrastructure they want in their areas as big developments come in.
I mean, obviously we consult local residents on the planning application, and therefore it's much easier with regard to Section 106 that if if local residents are raising a local issue, and because Section 106 is designed to deal with the impacts of the development proposal specific to the immediate area around the development proposal, it's then easier to address it at that stage. Part of the problem with SIL is you don't get your first payment until the development starts, then you may have phased payments because, like any kind of tax, that's the way these things work until you. So if I take the Nestles development, I'm probably highlighting the most complex possible development site by using that as an example because it's the biggest one. But I mean, it could be, there'll be large payments for that development in 5, 7. Could be a long way down the line. So I think in terms of that, whether we can do more in terms of our resident consultation on planning applications so the residents understand about Section 106, so they effectively say comments that then effectively are pushing officers to think more about 106 as an issue. There's this possibility there, and obviously we could do more information on chrysalis, or I think in Hillingdon People that's been featured before, so I'm not sure. I think the comms team have actually covered the chrysalis projects as far as you probably could, but I think it could be a bit complicated in terms of the actual levy because of it's meant to be spread borough-wide. I don't know if Rebecca wants to...
Yes, I'd like to add actually, for community infrastructure levy, in terms of the public realm, especially in Ruislip and also other parts at Hayes area, officers working in the public realms team, they liaise very closely with the planners, and I'm heavily involved with them as well. So in terms of how to facilitate some of the seal money for public realm, meaning public artwork, furniture, local different things for the local community, for town centre enhancement, Christmas lighting, all those. We have actually facilitated quite a bit of seal money, obviously not as extravagant as 2.1 million for highway, but sometimes for 25,000, 45,000, all these are facilitated to the public realm. And we obviously try to make sure, when, for example, like a town centre improvement scheme is in need of public realm money, so we normally speak to various people to make sure that some of the seal money catered for particular projects collected for that particular wards are allocated for the public realm money. That is one of the examples.
Thank you very much. I've got no other people wishing to speak apart from Councillor Markham, so assuming there's no other questions, I'll finish with you, Councillor Markham.
Thanks. I mean, there are lots of opportunities for residents to input into council decision making. I mean, certainly in terms of planning. I mean, through the website, members of the public are able to come to all the meetings if they want to. There are lots of opportunities for them to put forward their views, not least through their local ward councillors. So I feel very confident that if a resident wants to know what's going on in his patch, if he wants to make input, then there are lots of really good opportunities for him to do so. So I think that planning does not have an easy job, as we all know. But I'm quite happy, so far as residents are concerned, there are lots of opportunities for them to put an input.
Thank you very much. And on that note, thank you to the officers for your presentations this evening. Item 8 is our verbal update on progress of review of interlittering and fly tipping. Neil, do you wish to comment?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So I just thought I'd provide the committee with a brief update following the suggestions for potential revisions to the recommendations presented at the last meeting. So we've taken no away. We've been checking those things for feasibility, whether they actually are appropriate, whether they can be done. I'm pleased to say that the vast majority can be done. So we're looking at actually building those, where appropriate, into the recommendations themselves. Where the detail is quite prescriptive, we are suggesting that the recommendation, it might not be the most appropriate place to put that detail, and instead we're going to put a section in the final report detailing those suggestions for officers to consider when they come to actually implement those recommendations. So I'm hopeful that, all being well, I'll be able to send some revised draft of recommendations out to the committee in the not too distant future. In addition, the request for officers to look into new, innovative and best practice ideas, particularly from other local authorities, is something we've taken on board as well. We are trying to identify some of those innovative approaches. Again, if there is something that we feel is both of value and feasible, then I will, in conjunction with the chairman, as long as he's happy for me to put on the forward plan, I will bring it to the next committee meeting or an appropriate future committee meeting for the committee to consider before any potential inclusion into the final report. So that's where we're at with things.
Would the committee like that in the next meeting, the full plan? Yeah, okay. Item 9 is our Cabinet Forward Plan. Are there any comments or questions, Councillor Sweeting? On the microphone, please.
It has actually got the report on standards going to the Cabinet, and it's actually got Councillor David Simmons included there, but I don't think possibly he will be putting that in the book, but hey-ho. But so does this mean that we will be getting that report before it goes to Cabinet? Because we have a meeting in March which seems to have that as its title. So I'm a bit confused about whether that needs to slip then. We had mention made of it, didn't we? That you know the key stage results are there ready to come to us. But if they need to go to Cabinet first,
I'll actually double check that. I'm sure it's fine. I'll double check.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Any other comments? No. In which case we'll note that. And that concludes our business for this evening. Thank you. Have I missed something?
The work programme.
Oh, sorry, work programme. It's because we referred to the work programme. I thought we were discussing it. Sorry. It's getting late. Work programme, sorry. Any comments or questions?
Yeah, my worry is
Microphone again.
we haven't got
Thank
the
you.
standards report coming to the committee for, that needs to be clarified. We haven't really got very much in that meeting.
Neil?
If I may, I was actually hoping to discuss that. So you'll notice that this is now a rolling work programme, whereas previously it was only limited to municipal years. So you notice that future months are somewhat light on the information reports. So I was going to put it out to the committee to see whether they had any ideas. I have gone back to some of the previous minutes to see what the committee has previously suggested, and some of those suggestions were a briefing note regarding the enforcement of parking management schemes across the borough, particularly in relation to how the council works with its service provider there, a report on the updated strategic plan for the adult learning service, and I also thought the committee may be minded to visit the Brookfield site on that. And finally, I thought it might be nice to have an update on the provision of art services across the borough. I don't know if the committee are happy for me to progress those, then I can start to put those onto the board plan, but also ask that committee suggest any further information items.
Does anyone have any suggestions now? Councillor Markham?
Yeah, what about a review of the Battle of Britain bunker and how well that is doing in terms of numbers and the sort of financial situation of that, but particularly how successful it has been?
Yep.
You can look into that.
Councillor Mavis?
I was just going to broaden that to heritage in general, just a review on our heritage and looking at where we're investing our money in different aspects of the borough's heritage.
Councillor Morgan?
Just going on from
Michael, yeah.
Just going on from what we've been discussing this evening, the sports facilities that we actually have for the public in general, not just for children.
I also spoke with Neil outside of the meeting. In light of the budget, we were investing in the Uxbridge mortuary, and I just thought that might be a topic. We've touched on crematoriums and burial services, but that's one area of that side of things we've not actually looked at before, and we do provide a service not just to this borough, but also beyond, so it might be good to just see how that's doing and get some information on that. Thank you for that. Councillor Mavis?
Just in light of the decision on High Speed 2, whether there would be an opportunity to get because we're overseeing the local impacts, so it'd just be useful to get an update in the public realm, I suppose, and for councillors just on exactly the impact of that. And the other one from myself was some detail on that, as we've heard from Universal Youth Services, there's the fund around capital expenditure, and it's broadened into more groups. It'd be useful to hear the impact of that had over the recent years from budget expenditure.
In what field? Sorry, just specifically in what? Sense?
Sorry, in youth.
In youth.
The youth capital investment.
Thank you. Okay.
Sorry, Councillor Sweeting.
Could I mention children's centres? There was obviously a major reorganisation of children's centres. Now that's been embedded. I know that there's been some other reorganisations proposed, but it would be good to know how it's all working and whether it's delivering what we want it to what they want to deliver.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's quite a list for you, Neil.
Yeah, so I'll go away and check whether these are feasible.
Yeah, okay. Right, with there being no other points, thank you very much for your attendance. That concludes our business. Time finishes 10 to 9. Thank you very much.